Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome back to another Half-Bred Chaos reaction. And this video, it goes out to answer a very simple question involving Deltarune. Why is Kris so weird? Which, I mean, if you think about it, I can think of a couple of reasons. First off, being that canonically, their soul either is a separate being controlling their actions outside of their control, or their soul is being controlled by an outside being, i.e. us. So yeah, that would definitely, do it. Then there's my whole personal theory that Kris is in fact not an actual human, and that they are in fact an escaped goner, which is why they look so similar to the, the pieces that we use in the Goner Maker. Either like they're an escaped subject, or they're like a prototype, which is why we don't have complete and total control over them, and with them escaping, and Asgore and Toriel found them and adopted them. But I mean, yeah, when you get down to it, Kris is a very weird individual, and outside of, and that's outside of, normal antisocial behavior weirdness. So, yeah, definitely gonna want to see what Brett has to say on the topic here. So, yeah, of course, as always, original videos linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day. And yeah, with all out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
Howdy. Why is Kris so weird? Are they secretly dead? Possessed by demons? Some kind of cryptid hunter? Or just the results of taking the idea of a blank slate protagonist and running way too far with it? There's a lot to cover here, so let's get into it.
I mean, yeah, I mean, going back to Molly Starr's theory, I mean, the whole idea of Kris being a literal blank slate, and that's why they're just so blasé most of the time. I mean, apart from when we're not in there, apparently. But I mean, yeah, that, again, taking things way too literally.
Okay, let's start with the obvious question. Why do people think Kris might be dead? Well, the obvious answer to that is because Kris literally ripped their heart out of their chest and started walking around like a creepy zombie in a plot mandatory cutscene at the end of Chapter 1. But as I mentioned last video, there are also many little moments where the game makes allusions to this, including Susie referring to us as the school zombie.
Wait, last video? Oh god, I picked one in the middle, didn't I again?
Telling us we were sleeping like a corpse. And, of course, the fact that the light world counterpart to the shadow crystal allows the player to see through Kris's hand as if they were some kind of ghost. But the one that's had me particularly fascinated is the moment when Kris first enters the dark world, and we can hear the sounds of the ocean for a few seconds just before Kris wakes up.
So what would that have to do with them being dead?
I think about this a lot because of a very similar moment in Undertale where Frisk falls off a bridge in Waterfall and has a similar sort of dream sequence, this time showing the moment the first fallen human, aka Kara, fell into the underground and was found by Asriel. Since this is alluding to something that happened before the game started, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume something similar might be going on with Kris. But the question is, what? Am I suggesting Kris fell into the ocean? If that were true, it would explain the blue tint to their sprite in the dark world, since this pigmentation in paler humans usually implies a lack of oxygen or an exposure to the cold. But really now, am I implying that Kris somehow froze to death? How would that even happen?
Yeah, you'd think if that was the case, then, in the dark world where everybody seems to have an element, their element would be, ice, along with Noelle, as opposed to Blade. Am I getting the element things right? I'm not entirely sure.
It's not like Kris is hunting some kind of ice monster, or is childhood friends with a terrifyingly powerful spellcaster who specializes in ice magic and has a tendency to withdraw into a blackout fugue state while lethally wielding such magic. Oh. Okay, but...
Okay, that's okay, I'll just pause there, because, that does kind of... the whole thing of, monsters and magic in Deltarune is kind of iffy. Because, of course, in Undertale, we know that, not only can monsters use magic, but they're made of magic. But we're not entirely sure if the same can be said about monsters in Deltarune. Because, Noelle specifically said... I mean, at least for the whole, using magic thing, Noelle specifically was very wistful about saying, using magic to heal wounds and stuff like that, when most likely referring to her dad being sick. So it's obvious that, they can't use magic in the light world. So does that mean they're just incapable of using magic? Are they not made of magic in Deltarune? And then they can use magic in, like, the dark world? It's very weird.
But if that had happened, surely there would be serious repercussions from it that would leave a huge mark on the history of this town. And I don't see any of those, except, the mysterious event that the game keeps alluding to, in which Noelle's older sister disappeared, as Gorwaz kicked off the force, and a rift grew between these two families. But clearly, there's no way that happened, because that would require monsters in the light world to be using magic, and there's no way that could ever happen. Haha, hey, look over there. It looks like there's another part in Waterfall that foreshadows Kris' past, hidden in the Washua's joke flavor text. You tell a joke about two kids who played in a muddy flower garden. You tell a joke about a kid who ate a pie with their bare hands. You tell a joke about a kid who slept in the soil. These are all things Carol would have done while they were living with the Dreamers, with the final one being a reference to their eventual fate when their body was stolen from the coffin by Toriel and returned to the ruins so they could have a proper burial beneath a bed of golden flowers. Hence, a kid who slept in the soil. I wonder if there are any moments like this in Deltarune where Toby foreshadows major story elements in the enemy flavor text. Let's see. Acting on the Swatchlings in Chapter 2, Kris will sometimes do the following. Talked about the steam of a fresh hot chocolate. Talked about the warmth of a loving embrace. Talked about the crunch of the last pickle in the refrigerator. Talked about the snow matted on your brother's nose. Talked about the chill of the wind on the ice skating pond. Oh? Is this foreshadowing? It would explain the prevalence of wind in the soundtrack and the references to water and waves. The pop-ups have some pretty interesting ones too if you click on the advertisements. Noelle misclicked on a link to buy how to draw dragons. Noelle clicked on a link for hot female Santas in your area.
Oh, okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, when I was a lot younger, I did do something very similar when I was looking up stuff for a project on Titanic when I was in elementary school.
Noelle clicked on a link for creepy game glitch compilations. You unconsciously clicked on a pop-up about demon summoning classes for teens. Okay, I guess there.
It was going back to that. I never noticed that before, but I love how, like, when Kris is doing her thing, Noelle just has no idea what to do, and she's just scratching her back. It's like, what do I do now?
Clicked on a pop-up about demon summoning classes for teens. Okay, I guess there's no ignoring it. Let's talk about using magic in the light world and why the fandom believes it to be impossible. I
literally
believe
what
our
I was
most
talking about
concrete
before.
statement on this topic comes from Noelle Holiday, specifically at the end of Chapter 2, when she says,
I've never had an adventure like this before,
with axes and battles and magic,
where everything can be healed with a little spell.
and no matter what happens, no one tells us what to do.
Now, this is definitely not sufficient on its own, because if we notice here, magic is placed alongside axes and battles on the list of things the real world does not have, which can't be true, right? Surely the real world has axes and battles, even if they aren't exactly commonplace. However,
I mean, you never know. This might have been a completely pacifistic society that's never had a war or a fight at all in its entire history, and that's why Susie kind of sticks out so much, because she's just really mean.
we also get this line from the hospital when Noelle visits her father.
I wish I knew healing magic in real life. Then I would make you better, and it wouldn't just be me and Mom.
Note that she doesn't say, I wish healing magic was possible in real life, just that she wishes she knew how to perform it. A bit like if I said, I wish I knew martial arts in real life. Like, this doesn't necessarily mean magic doesn't exist in the light world, just that it isn't as simple or common as it is in the...
I mean, okay, this might be me being a little pedantic, but I will go with her saying, like, that magic isn't real in this instance, because at the moment she's playing a video game, you know, on her, I don't know what you call that, DS, Game Boy, whatever the enrolled is. So, I mean, she could be, you know, using healing magic in the game and then wishing that she knew how to do healing magic in real life, because, you know, it's not possible. I mean, at the end of the day, this is entirely an argument of syntax.
a dark world. Noelle does also have a bit of a tendency toward defeatism, so she may not be the best indicator of what is and is not possible, if you know what I mean. I've also heard it argued that Toriel's stove is yet more evidence toward a lack of magic in the light world, since in Undertale, her stove is notably mentioned to be clean because she uses fire magic instead, while in Deltarune, there's some cinnamony batter caked on the stove top. But I'd actually argue this is evidence, not that magic no longer exists within Deltarune, but that its place in society has shifted. In Undertale, magic was commonplace and widely accepted for its utility and as a method of self-expression. But in Deltarune, it seems like there is a greater emphasis on religion and spiritualism and how those two things shape our abilities. In the diner, Caddy tells us that she taught Noelle protection spells and showed her occult findings. This informs us that magic in this world does have spiritual and potentially religious connotations, which potentially explains Toriel's reluctance to use magic, as we know from the various NPCs around town that Toriel is both religiously devout and extremely strict, attending church regularly, keeping a book of hymns by the couch, and apparently instilling within Asriel a need to confess perceived sins to Father Alvin, despite the absence of sin or confession in the official religion. Caddy also informs us that she and Kris studied occult together and asks us to find her an incantation or a spell for silence. And personally, I think this can tell us something rather interesting about Kris's character. If we talk to Toriel in Chapter 1, she'll tell us a story about Kris from back when they were a little kid, asking when their horns would grow in. It's natural for a child to look to their parents and older siblings as models for how they will be when they grow up. And I'd argue this continues in Chapter 2, when we learn that Kris's internet search history includes how to use magic. If I might go out on a limb here, I would argue that magic is actually a normal part of a monster's biology in Deltarune, and that Kris grew up wondering how they might learn to use it, just like their big brother Asriel and their neighbor Noelle. We see further evidence of this in the library, back in the light world, where Kris complains that the book on magic tricks is clearly written for monsters, with many of the tricks requiring orbs or floating hands. But I know what you're thinking. These are some pretty bold claims, right? So where's my evidence that magic even exists in the light world? Well...
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, then again, I mean, the whole idea with creating the Dark Worlds, like, wasn't there some implication that it required a lot of determination? You know, something that, you know, that humans are supposedly very rich in? Or that humans, you know, have a lot of? But then again, they also
Does that count? Back in Chapter 1, I always just assumed Dark Worlds were being opened up by Gaster, using some sort of hand-wavy science machine. After all, he describes the Dark Worlds as being an experiment back in Undertale, and the shelter has this sort of rumbling, machine-like sound that somewhat resembles a generator, but when sped up, reveals the same background noise from Gaster's room in Undertale. So at that point, it made sense to assume Dark Worlds weren't necessarily magic. But, I just saw Kris make a Dark World by stabbing the ground with what appears to be an ordinary kitchen knife. So if this doesn't count as magic, then I think the internet and I just have completely different definitions of what counts as magic, although I do understand the hesitation to use this as evidence. I think a lot of
Because again, yeah, Kris is a human, not a monster, so... Oh, wait, I just noticed, has the cursor been in the middle of the video this entire time? Sorry. But, yeah, so I mean, again, completely different species with completely different capabilities, so I mean, the fact that Kris can do that isn't evidence enough that monsters as a whole can do magic in Deltarune like they could in Undertale. Yeah, it's so weird. Why do these two super similar worlds have to be so different?
Have become pretty accustomed to assuming humans just can't do magic in the Undertale universe. However, if we think back to the opening sequence from Undertale, it tells us that the humans sealed monsters underground with a magic spell. So, call it determination if you want, but whether this is an inherent skill, known only to a select few, or a skill humans can study in school, clearly humans do perform magic, and Kris has been looking into how it might be done. I accept that acts aren't magic, of course, but when you think of the desires of the other Lightners, Noelle wants to learn healing magic, Susie wants to fight. It seems like the Dark World gives them powers matching those desires, so I would be pretty surprised if Kris never learned to use magic. So, taking all of this together, my proposition is simple. Kris literally summoned a demon and sold their soul to them. It all makes sense now. This is why the king calls Kris Lightbringer. It explains why we keep hearing Gaster's voice in our head when we first start up the game and whenever we die in Chapter 1, and those little red horns Kris used to wear. Of course,
Devil
this must be
horns.
foreshadowing. You could frame this as Kris having sold their soul to us, the player, and that we are, therefore, a demon.
That is definitely weird. So I guess that could be why, you know, Kris wants to get rid of us so badly. I mean, they realize that, you know, what they did was a mistake, and now that their body's being controlled by some not omnipotent, omnipresent being, like, that's controlling your body and taking them on wild and dangerous adventures while controlling them. That would be, like, really sick and freaky.
Functionally possessing Kris. Or you could frame this as Kris selling their soul to Gaster, who then set up a connection between the soul and the player. But this still leaves us with one question. Why? Why would Kris sell their soul to Gaster? Why are they so uncooperative with us at times? And why the heck does this topic keep coming back to us?
Hot and fresh cheese. That's not how you spell cheese. Just like in your dreams.
I see, with all these little allusions to hell and the undead. If I see turns out to be a demon, I swear to the angel, I'm going to flip a biscuit. But if I had to take a stab in the dark, I think Kris is trying to boundary break. There are a lot of interesting little parallels to be drawn between Kris, Jevil, and Spamton, and if there's one thing the three of them have in common, it's their uncanny awareness of the world beyond the veil. Jevil shares Kris's devil-based theming, while Spamton frames Kris's situation as being more akin to that of a puppet beneath a malevolent puppet master. And while Jevil's little cell seems to clip out of the map itself, Spamton seems to be able to clip into the game's code and spit out unused text that isn't normally accessible to either the player or the characters. But that begs the question, what precisely is Kris trying to do? Are they trying to reach the gunner in the gunner code? Are they looking for deaths as real? The answer is unknown. I began this video asking why Kris was so weird. But I'd like to take a moment to point out that weird is a word with some very interesting implications within the world of Deltarune. It's used to describe Spamton, of course, but it also comes up when we take actions that defy logic and seem to scoot us off the beaten path. Asking Sans about Papyrus in Chapter 2, when we haven't spoken to him in Chapter 1, prompts him to say that it's a little weird we asked that. The shortcut door, which can warp us back to earlier parts of the chapter, is described as having a weird light. I've mentioned before that the Snowgrave route should actually be called the Weird route due to the name the game gives the variables associated with it.
Yeah.
But looking into it more, the word weird is actually used a lot more than I initially considered. Like, it's not just the weird event. Entire variables used to lock the events and dialogue off from other routes are simply named weird. And when Noelle's father asks Noelle why she seems so tense after being compelled to murder her best friend, she says she had a weird dream. If weird describes something or someone that defies the rules and breaks off the expected path, then it sort of gives new context to this line.
Kris is the only one who knows how weird I am. It's not fair, you know. Everyone knows how weird you are. Fa ha ha ha.
The text-to-speech, gotta love it.
Hey, wanna hear something really weird that's probably totally unintentional? So we all know there's a lot of little hints tying Noelle to Gaster, yes?
Yeah.
Between the Spamton sweepstakes' story about the white egg in her game, whose name she can't remember, that suddenly disappeared without a trace. The repetition of Gaster's leitmotif in her songs, the referring to her as an angel with the tattered wings, aka a fallen angel, or a demon. And we also know that the number 666 is associated with Gaster because of his monster check data in Undertale that basically floods us with the number 6. This is going to sound absolutely unhinged, but just after you get the freeze ring on the weird route, and you have this little moment with Noelle where she's struck by the temptation to step off of this switch and kill us, you know what triggers this little animation? It's triggered by Kris standing at X coordinate 666. Weird, isn't it?
Really? My God. First it was cats. Well, no, first it was 666. Then it was cats. But now we're learning that 666 is even further reaching than I initially thought. God, okay, wait a second. Toby is a dog, and, being the creator of the game, that would mean that, dogs are more, I guess you would call holy, or at least closer to divinity than other things. So, is Toby trying to say here that cats are inherently closer to the devil because they're antithetical to dogs? And if that's the case, what does that make Temmie?
Have fun.
Honestly, again, Toby has to be building up to something with all this. Like, all of the sixes when it comes to Gaster, all of the cats when it comes to elements, all of this stuff it's nuts. And the fact that we don't have any concrete answers really is just driving me up a wall. Again, I swear, all of this is... Again, we only have a couple more months before the next chapters are released, hopefully. So again, I hope we get more answers to this stuff, but it is nuts. Really, it is. But yeah, that's going to be it for now. So yeah, of course, as always, original videos linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video linked to my Let's Play of the day. And yeah, with all that out of the way, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.